All right, guys, it's just part one of, there's going to be two parts to this section. This first one will explain two of the three perspectives, and then the last one will be obviously the last uh, perspective that we're going to look at here today. So when we look at the objective of this video, be able to describe the three main theoretical perspectives in sociology. In particular, with this video, we're going to be talking about functionalism and conflict perspective. Okay, so what I want you guys to do is I'm going to put up a picture. All right, and I want you to think in your head as you see this picture, what's the first thing that you see? All right, so here's the first one. What's the first thing you saw when you looked at this? Okay, was it a duck with a beak here and then the head back here? Or was it a bunny? It's kind of like the mouth area here, eye here, and ears pulled back. All right, next one. What's the first thing that you saw there? Was it a seal? The nose, the eyes, kind of fins back here? Or was it a donkey, horse head, something along those lines when you take a look at it? Next one. And this one always has like a 50-50 split. Okay, how many of you saw what looked to be a gentleman playing maybe like a saxophone, some type of musical instrument? Or did you see, all right, what could be a woman's face? So lips, nose, eyes, kind of like the hair coming over here. This would be the rest of the outline. I know this was not meant to scare you. This one, yeah, it's kind of like a scary clown face. All right, as you look obviously a little bit closer, you're going to see some women. Looks like they're sitting around and talking. Okay, almost like a mirrored image. All right, so which of these yellow lines is bigger when you first look at it? Okay, obviously we know they are the same. Well, hopefully at this point in time you know they are the same, but this one being darker and where it's at along, actually it's not even darker, I don't think, but it looks that, I don't know. But with the perspective here, all right, this obviously looks to be larger. Okay, how many of you saw, I don't know, a candle holder, vase maybe of some sort, or did you see two faces? Okay, mouth, nose. Now, are these lines parallel or do they slope? What's it look like? Right, obviously you know this is a trick, so once you start kind of focusing in, you realize that they are parallel. Okay, it's just that the boxes have been moved. So let's think about this for a second, okay? Normally I would do that in class and we'd talk about, when we'd show of hands, who saw what, and you'd realize that some of you saw one thing while some of you saw another, all right? So the whole idea of this is that we all don't see. Now that's just our visual, that's more perceptual, all right? But we all have different perspectives on how we would explain specific events also. So if I could have read off all the essays about poverty that were due, okay, you'd realize that a lot of you came up with something different. There were not too many similar essays. All right, so you all viewed it differently. And obviously that's a type of question where you could come with it a lot of different angles. All right, but what we're going to look at here, there's three theoretical perspectives, kind of overarching perspectives in sociology that have kind of dominated for a while. And we're going to take a look at those three. So what is a theoretical perspective? So it's a set of assumptions accepted as true by its supporters. All right, it says often seen as general statements about how some parts of the world fit together and work. All right, and with these, we're going to have ones that they somewhat compete with each other in trying to explain something. It's because of the avenue that they're going down typically when they do try to explain it. All right. And so it says, with the competing and conflicting theories exist, we give you an example. So let's think of how the world came about, how Earth got here. All right. Now, there's different theories in the science world. There are biblical theories. Okay. And people, here's the thing, is though that there are people that believe in all of these, every single one. Okay. They're on the train for the Big Bang Theory. All right. The other one might be on the train with for what the Bible says. All right. So you have these conflicting theories. And then we've had over time where people have literally tried to find evidence of what this is. Now, when looking at this from the sociology perspective, when you talk about we make generalizations and we do certain things, there's going to be numbers and there's going to be that science side that's going to back up probably whatever avenue they take. All right. It's just that some people will adopt maybe one in particular. So what are these three? It's called functionalism, or sometimes functional analysis, structural functionalism. It has a few different names out there in the sociology world. We have conflict theory. This one I think is the easiest kind of one to grasp of how this works. And then we have, and maybe the last two are symbolic interactionism. Okay. And we'll take a look at that one here in the second video that you should watch for this section. So functionalism or functional analysis emphasizes the contributions, or which those are what are the functions of each part of a society. All right. And when we talk about these functions, we're talking about the family as a part of society, the economy, religion. These would all be these parts. All right. And they're essentially going to say that a change in one area leads to a change in another. And I'll explain this here in a second. But you got to think of that society as a whole unit is made up of interrelated parts that work together. All right. And this one really goes back to the roots of sociology. This goes back to Comte and Spencer from the Section 2 material. And they viewed society as a living organism, kind of similar to like an animal's body. Um, and just as a person or an animal has organs that function together, so does society in their view. And just like this, if it's going to function smoothly at its peak, all parts must work together in harmony. Okay. Um, Durkheim's another one of the theorists that we talked about that also was a functionalist. And he saw that each is composed of its many parts with its own function. He said that when all parts of a society kind of fulfill their functions, society is in what we call a normal state. If one of those parts is not fulfilling their functions, society is in an abnormal, or what he would call a pathological state. All right. Um, so they say, like functionists will say, we need to look both at the structure, so how they fit together, and the function. So what is the actual function of those parts independently? So that's how we got to look at it. And so this idea that a change in one area will lead to a change in another, if we have a slow economy, that's going to affect the family. It's going to affect everywhere from the food that they put on their table to their jobs to schooling to where they live, all of this. Okay. And the more dysfunction, let's say that it's a really, really bad economy, talking about like the Great Depression, think about the impact that would then have on family. Hopefully that makes sense. They talk about too that with everything, society will return to a state of stability after some type of upheaval. Um, I use the example of, if you think of like the 60s, 70s, kind of like that hippie movement, that was something that was just kind of absorbed into society. It didn't completely revolutionize it. We still talk about it in this historic sense, and there's elements of it still around. But the world did not turn into one big Woodstock festival. All right. There was less of that going on than what people would expect, but that is what is portrayed as that's what the 60s and 70s were. Not completely, okay, but it was definitely an element of society, but it didn't completely revolutionize it. So we're going to talk about two different types of functions. We want to talk about manifest and latent. And manifest functions within this theory are those functions within our society that are intended and recognized, while latent are unintended and unrecognized. So here's a good example to explain this to you. So why your parents send you to school, or why society deems you should be in school, is essentially to learn. Talked about that previously. So those are the main intentions. And what you like to come to school for, all right, are kind of those latent functions. They're the unintended, unrecognized, but still good. So a lot of you probably like for the social side of it. Maybe it's an extracurricular that you're in, so you enjoy that, which is still somewhat of what school is about. But the main, all right, what is intended and recognized, number one above all, is that idea of learning. Okay, so that becomes really important here. So then, what is dysfunction? Elements that have negative consequences. So we have these different things that can happen within our society that are going to increase maybe deviance and other things within our society. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. We'll talk about this when we do our live section too. All right. Um, and then the last thing to leave you with functionalism is that functionalists say the consensus of values accounts for the high degree of cooperation in society. All right. For the most part, we would agree that most people in our society value hard work. Okay. It always doesn't seem that way, but for the majority do. Okay. Most of us have jobs. Majority of us go to those jobs every day, and we function within those jobs, and that allows us to we are able to supply products, we're able to supply services, and all these things that we need. Think about it, as a consumer, when you're not working, you are hoping that other people are doing their job well. You don't go into establishment thinking they're going to be rude to you. Much like if you're in a position where somebody's coming into you, you don't, all right, or should not, right, hopefully be rude to them. So that's kind of how we function. We value hard work and we value cooperation. All right, and this is what kind of helps us function according to them, because we realize that's what we need. All right, so let's go to the second one, conflict perspective. This is pretty easy. Please don't get this wrong on the test. This is the perspective that emphasizes conflict. Obviously, it's called conflict perspective. But not only conflict, it also emphasizes competition, change, and constraint within a society. Okay, so you get a good idea of what this is going to focus on. So, so functionalist, if you think about what we just talked about, they see the basic agreement in society. So how we work together to get things done. Conflict perspective is going to take the angle where they're going to focus on how the disagreements, okay, play a role in what's going on. So they're going to talk about how groups compete as they try to preserve their own special values and interests. And it focuses on who has the power and the ability to control others. So power being the ability to control others. So they're saying they'll explain a lot of things historically as different groups try to gain power. And if you think about this, you go back to like your history classes, okay? Who had power in the beginning, right? White males with that owned property. So from the beginning, and really from the beginning of time, you wanted to always obtain what? Wealth. Wealth oftentimes transfers into power, but for the most part, wealth and having um, an amount of money, a good amount of money, will give you somewhat power within society. Not power always over others, but sometimes power just to purchase things that somebody else can't either. Okay, but we're gonna typically in this one we're gonna focus on how they use that to control others. So how would they explain social change? Let's look at something. The women's movement. All right. So in the what was the women's movement always trying to obtain? At the end of the day, they were trying to change the balance of power, right? If you have that scale and all of it is in the male population. They're trying to shift that scale to get it to be equal or at least equal, okay, up to that point, and maybe even more. Who knows? All right. But the idea of it is the goal is to change the balance of power. So, what have we seen where this is change the balance of power to become more equal? More women have remained single and independent, okay, marrying later in life. All right. If you put those two together, okay, it's the idea of more women looking for post-secondary education, getting into jobs, higher paying jobs, focusing on trying to get into those, and the ability to fill those positions. We know that there's still a gap, but they've closed the gap somewhat, but we're trying, that's one of the focuses there, because they realize when they focus the pay wage gap, or sorry, when they focus on the pay wage gap and get that more equal, they get more on an equal playing field, not only within the business and in the working world, but obviously then access to wealth, which we talked about earlier. Okay. Um, and often we talk about remaining single and independent. In our society, we've always viewed this idea that like a woman is there to somehow support the dreams of a man. And I'm telling you this, I agree, that's wrong. Okay. It's the idea that you should support each other if you're going to be in a really good relationship, obviously. But that whole idea of kind of working to kind of fulfill what they want, okay, um, and not somebody else kind of puts those two together too. All right, we could go. There's a lot of layers to that, which we'll talk about later. Fewer children. Okay, you got to think about this. Let's go back to, let's focus on the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and obviously before. Okay, with the idea of you can combine these last two bullets. This is the old school. Woman stays home, takes care of the house, homemaker. You can have more children because they'll